We have another really cool panel here talking about the future of work, and the panel will be introduced here by an expert who is from the area. We're going to bring it down to something very locally specific. Luther Jackson, to my immediate right, is program manager at Nova Workforce Development Agency. He works very closely with the state of California, in fact, on the workforce, or with the California Workforce Development Board. So very much hands-on. What do we do in certain regions? How do we get people into work? How do we train people? And I will let Luther introduce the panel. Depending on how the conversation goes, we will have a Q&A, again with microphones, because we think it's important to recognize that we have a bunch of humans, not just avatars in the room, right? So Slido is nice, Attendify is nice, but we also want to hear the live voices. And so whenever the panel is ready, we will spread the microphones and the stage is yours, okay? Luther, please.
Thank you very much.
Let's give him a round of applause, yeah?
Thank you. Thank you, Olaf, for that gracious introduction, and welcome to Silicon Valley and all of our traffic and everything else. I'm pleased to introduce our two brilliant panelists. Dr. Markus Dix works in the policy lab of the German Federal Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs, addressing digital work in society. He is keenly interested in the impacts of new technologies like AI and is helping to shape the German AI strategy. Markus has a background in vocational training and has 10 years of experience in industry. Welcome to the panel.
Thank you.
Dr. Asher Sinensky is a senior member of the executive team of Palantir, the big data analytics software company in Palo Alto. He has worked in various levels of Palantir's operations, including technical, business, and customer engagement. Asher has a specific focus on understanding and deriving actionable meaning from data. Welcome, Asher.
Thank you.
Professor Catherine Shaw from Stanford Graduate School of Business was supposed to be with us today, but she's unable to attend. So my first question is to learn more about both of you. One of the key requirements for career success in the Silicon Valley innovation economy is the capacity for continuous personal reinvention. Both of you have taken interesting career journeys. Markus from the steel industry to AI, and Asher from a PhD in material science to big data. What reinvention lessons from your careers can you share with Silicon Valley workers looking to remain relevant in the current and future AI economies? Markus, you want to start?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Luther. Well, from my experience, when I left from school when I was 16 at the lowest degree, and I started working at Krupp Steel and made a vocational training. But from the very beginning, to me, it was clear this sector is going down. And I asked myself, so is this job still available in 5 or 10 years? And the answer was more or less no, this industry is going down. And then I asked myself, okay, what is interesting to me? What makes me drive? And I said, okay, I want to go to the university and study something technical. And then I was looking for people that were like-minded, like me. And also I was looking for structures to go to evening class, to access to university. And so it's personal motivation, but you also need structures that you can go to evening class and so on. And that is a public-funded education system in Germany that makes this possible for me.
Great. Asher?
Yeah, so it's interesting always to think about these journeys, right? Because they're such an important part of what defines us. I studied material science, and my intention had always been to stay in the field, and actually. Specifically, I wanted to work in national labs. There's a bunch of national labs in the United States, and I had worked in them as both an undergraduate and a graduate student and really enjoyed that environment. And then somewhere along the way, I got extremely derailed. It turned out that my wife's roommate's boyfriend, childhood chess competitor, was a co-founder of Palantir. And through that series of hops, I was connected to the company. and did something that was really quite unexpected. It's also quite unexpected that they would want to hire someone like me. I don't have a software background. I don't even have a computational background. My background as a material scientist was mostly sort of physical and experimental. And I was actually the first person hired at the company who didn't have a computer science background other than our CEO, Alex Karp, whose background is philosophy. And so it was sort of a strange place for me to arrive. I think that when people are exploring these types of journeys, it might be easy to look at one like mine and think that that was like a very punctuated change. But I think that journeys, you should seek the path that seems that's shortest, right? You want to sort of be careful in how you're making these steps, because if you do it too dramatically, you're going to you could end up in the wrong place or not really understand the steps that you took along the way. For some reason, this is bringing to mind like in the early 80s, right, there was this pretty clear signal that communism was failing as like an economic ideal. And there was a lot of interest in the communist world to figure out, well, how are we going to sort of start to incorporate capitalist ideals or capitalist concepts into what we're doing? And there was like the model that Gorbachev took, which was like to go and like meet with Milton Friedman and like give over your economy to the market. And then there was the path that Deng Xiaoping took, which was this idea that's sort of canonicalized in this idea of crossing the river by feeling the stones, right? And it's like you want to take sort of gradual steps and sort of figure out what is the shortest step that you can take as part of the journey so that you're not finding yourself kind of washed away. And I think that one of the things that I found for me was trying to understand what were the smaller steps that I could take, and what seemed like a really dramatic change made it much easier and more possible. And I think we have to be open-minded as to what are the steps that we can take, what are our strengths and weaknesses, and how can we adapt to the environments that we're in.
Great, well, thank you. So a question for both of you. What major challenges do we face considering the impact of technological change on the labor markets, and how can we address them? Marcus?
Well, I think from the German perspective, I think it's the speed of the digital transformation. I remember, let's say 5 years ago, when I started at the ministry, everybody was talking about Industry 4.0. They're talking about small and medium-sized enterprises and the impact that this technology will have. And politics started to think about, okay, what do we have to do? Another point is the lack of digital experts is a problem today. On one hand, jobs will disappear, that's clear. On the other hand, we have a lack of experts like data scientists or artificial intelligence specialists. And I think the third challenges are the small and medium-sized enterprise that I mentioned before, because most of the companies in Germany are small and medium-sized. And I think it's really hard for them to adapt all these changes and transformations. And it's also difficult for them to find experts, because nobody wants to work in, let's say, Ostwestfalen. The experts want to go to Berlin, for example, to Munich. And so it's really difficult for them to hire people and also to pay the amount of money that big companies can pay to them. And I think these are three challenges that we see every time. In Industry 4.0, it was the same situation. Now is it with AI, and in 5 to 10 years, it will something different. So it's happening time and again.
Yeah, so technological change does a couple of things, right? So it creates a lot of new opportunities, right? Because new types of business are created and new types of skill sets become valuable that maybe weren't as valuable before. We talked about a couple just now in data science and artificial intelligence. You know, being an expert in data science or artificial intelligence just wasn't that useful 50 years ago, unless you were going to be an academic, right? It's just not something that most companies really offered. And now almost every company wants to hire people who have those types of skill sets. So that technological change has created some types of careers. But of course, there's a lot of types of vocations that are threatened to, or they experience a threat of disruption from these technological changes. I think in the US, there's something like 30 million jobs that are expected to in some way be disrupted by technological innovation. And that's a problem, right? What the nature of that innovation or that disruption is complicated. I thought that Professor Varian's talk talked a little bit about how it's not always the case that a job gets completely disrupted out of existence. Like that's actually fairly rare, but it gets disrupted in ways that can be quite challenging to deal with. I think that there's a lot of different things that you want to do as you start to think about engaging with these topics. So I think that one thing is that it's very important to understand the unique skills that humans actually bring to the table, right? We are not machines, and not machines in a whole variety of ways, both that make us very strong and in some ways make us weaker than machines. But there's a lot of things that we bring to the table that are really valuable. And so as you think about technological development and how you deploy technology into environments that involve humans, there's a lot of value in thinking about what can a human do to express the values that they're bringing into this environment. So, right, what's the sort of complementarity between the human systems and the computational systems? I think that another thing that's going to be really important as we sort of deal with technological innovation is thinking about workers themselves and how are we modifying our vision of what it means for a worker to be like sort of safe and satisfied. And there's technology can be immensely valuable in making workers safer. That safety is going to start extending into other domains like digital safety. Are workers being protected in a whole variety of ways? Is there information about them being protected? And then I think that another thing that's really important when we think about training and retraining is how is it that we can have technology that starts to meet the worker halfway, or hopefully actually meet the worker where they are, right? So rather than demanding massive retraining on the parts of the workers, can we as technologists build technologies that are already designed to take advantage of the things that the workers are already capable of? And there's a whole range of different types of workers who have lifetimes of experience in their industries. Are there things that we can do to make it more possible for them to express that experience using technology rather than forcing them to take the journey to the tech, have the tech take the journey to them?
Well, that's a great point. Let's drill down on that a little more and talk about opportunities. Again, this question of humans and machines working together as complements. You want to start, Marcus?
Yes, well, when humans and machine interact with each other, well, we have seen it in the presentation from Fraunhofer before, from Simon. So this is the German idea from the future of work, I would say. And for example, machines can take over dangerous tasks, for example, in special situations, so they can help people in their daily work. And they can also protect the health of the employees with this exo arm we have seen in this presentation. And machine can generally support the people in their daily life and they work. For example, if you have a huge amount of data, you need artificial intelligence to check all the data and to find new information and to look for inventions. And another point, it's a huge discussion in Germany right now, maybe reshoring of jobs, for example, that we can, by Industry 4.0 or by artificial intelligence, bring jobs back to Germany. For example, the Speed Factory of Adidas in the south of Germany, they produce sneakers within Germany. In former times it was in China, and now they try to reshore these jobs, but it's a race. China will do the same. But these are all opportunities by artificial intelligence and robotics for the jobs of the future.
Great. Asher, other thoughts on that?
Sure. Yeah. So I think it's useful to think about what are the sort of complementary skills between humans and computers. Like, what are the things that humans are good at, and what are the things that computers are good at? So computers are very good. Computational systems, robotic systems are very good at rote tasks, right? Things that involve a lot of repetition. Things that involve a lot of scale or doing things very quickly, they tend to be better than humans at. Then humans tend to be good at a lot of other types of skills that frequently are harder to quantify, but still really matter. Things like we're very good at perceiving, we're very good at understanding, we're very good at sort of abstracting, and these are ideas that, in some sense, actually get kind of poo-pooed in terms of like their importance, and part of that is because we don't know how to describe them computationally, and so they can't be that valuable. But obviously, every real problem that matters tends to incorporate those things. There's a professor at Carnegie Mellon named Hans Moravec, who's a roboticist and artificial intelligence researcher, and And he has this paradox named after him called Moravec's paradox, that I'm sure everyone in the audience knows. But basically what this paradox looks at is this idea that there's a set of tasks that seem really hard for humans that tend to be really easy for computers, but there's also this complementary set of tasks that seem very easy for humans and tend to be really hard for computational systems. You know, if I give you 200-digit numbers and ask you to divide one into the other, it's like basically impossible for a human to do that by hand and trivial for a computer. If I ask my 2-year-old daughter to go across the room, pick up a particular stuffed animal, put it in a box, and bring it back to me, it's like trivial, but very difficult to do computationally. And so there's a lot of room to think about where the complementary skills of human and computational systems start to meet. I actually think it goes even further than that, though. I think there's more than just the computational skills. I think that, or the complementary skills. I think that there's also this idea about at that moment of interface between humans and computers, there's a lot of value that can be unlocked there that's actually much more than is present in either system independently. And so you can get tremendous value generation by thinking about how you build systems that really incorporate humans and computers together rather than trying to replace one or the other.
So synergistic values.
Yeah. And that synergy that emerges is like much higher, much stronger than the human or the computer independently.
Great. So Marcus, regarding skill shortages and talent dislocations caused by AI, who's responsible for providing and financing sufficient retraining and skill upgrading opportunities? And are there some successful models you'd like to call out today?
Well, that's a question or discussion we will have in Germany right now. It's obvious that we have to do retraining and reskilling for all these people. Their jobs are changing. And from our point of view, it's up to the companies to re-educate their people. We have been in Frankfurt some weeks ago at a Inkdima bank, and they made a total change within their organization. And they say, okay, we cannot find the experts we need, so we give everybody a chance to retraining. They also restructured the whole company, and so they took their own employees and reskilled them, for example. But we know this from the perspective of the ministry, we need to support the companies in this transformation, and we do this together with the unions. We have done this together in former times in case of Industry 4.0, and we do this again in case of artificial intelligence, and that's why the government started the National Retraining Strategy together with the Ministry of Education and Research. And so the idea is lifelong learning. In Germany, some people think, okay, lifelong learning sounds like a lifelong prison, but this is reality. It's lifelong learning, and you have to think about your job or your task every 5 to 10 years and have to go back to the university. I also went 2 times to university. And so just one example from the German AI strategy, we started with so-called AI labs, so that we give small and medium-sized enterprises a chance to experiment with artificial intelligence, to re-educate and reskill their employees. And we will also start so-called future centers. We will start with them in Eastern Germany. They will start in November. And it's also, there are, let's say, local hubs that bring together companies, unions, and also trade associations. And their task is not to invent something, but to retrain the people and also the organizational change that comes to digital transformation. And we will do this also for Western Germany in next year. So it also needs some structural support in the regions.
And I would say the partnership that you talk about with various stakeholders is something we're in need of here. I would say that's something that's missing here. Asher, I like what you said about those human skills that can be hard to quantify and hard to articulate. So they tend to be not given the prominence that they should. So I was doing some research on you, and I read an interview, and you talked about the qualifications for a Palantir engineer, a privacy and civil liberties engineer. And of course, one of the qualities was technical knowledge, but also you talked about creativity, empathy, and communication skills. Now, I'm assuming the person with these non-technical skills will thrive and not be threatened by replacement by machine. How do we teach and develop these skills, and how early should we start?
I mean, I think that those are things that should be part of our educational system from the beginning. The idea that these things would sort of get left out because we're going to replace them with, teaching kindergartners how to code seems somewhat absurd to me. These things are like so obviously valuable. And part of the reason why they're so obviously valuable is because the only things that actually have intrinsic value are those things that humans value, right? Value is actually not an objective idea, it's a subjective idea, it's normative. Humans decide what is valuable and what is not. And so all of these things that we're building, all these technologies, all these robots, all these new systems are only meaningful insofar as they increase a sense of at least some humans' value. Right, and so if we're not operating in a way where there's like common understanding of what those values should be, if there's not dialogue about how those things are evolving and changing, that's where you're going to arise. That's where conflict is going to arise. But there's no way to do it without actually having the conversation, because you can't just derive these things from first principles. They're part of a conversation, and so figuring out how to get those things into our systematic understanding of what is valuable early on is really critical, because if it's not there, then you have a problem. I find it interesting. So if you want to become a civil engineer, right, and you want to build bridges or something like that, you have to get a qualification for that. You have to take a series of exams that show that you're qualified to do that. And those exams include ethical training, right? That's actually part of what's required to become a civil engineer, at least in the United States. If you want to become a computer scientist, there's no similar qualification, right? And part of that is because computer scientists perhaps think of themselves more as scientists than engineers, but they're very much engineers, I would say, and a lot of what they're doing, but they also think about the things that they're doing as being neutral, right? That the technologies they're building are neutral technologies. It's more about who's applying those technologies that has to think about it, and I think that's clearly wrong, right? You have to think about the potential impacts of what you're doing, just like the civil engineer has to think about the potential impacts of what they're doing. And so introducing ethical training as part of these types of training, I think, is also something that's going to be really important going forward.
Great, great. So a couple of weeks ago, I attended a fabulous conference in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And by the way, if you haven't been, I highly recommend it. And had a chance to meet there Rachel Harmon, who has a job title I've never heard of before. She's the Deputy Director of Talent Development for the city of Birmingham, Alabama. Now, her city has some significant challenges: a poverty rate of 28%, deindustrialization, and one of the highest youth unemployment rates in the country. And yet she is absolutely dedicated to helping her citizens thrive in an AI economy. So if the two of you were hired as advisors for Rachel in Birmingham, what would your recommendations be for how she and her colleagues can help get Birmingham's underappreciated talent on the field?
All right. Yeah, so I think that it's a very challenging problem. I think that part of the reason why it's a challenging problem is because it's got to be thought of as like a multi-generational problem. Like, you're not just going to flip a switch and the sort of realities of the environment in Birmingham are going to suddenly change. So there has to be kind of a long game associated with thinking about solving something like this. And I think that there's a lot of different places to start. I think one of the important places to start is to try and identify those particularly promising individuals as early as possible and start to think about how can we cultivate them and help them develop. And the reason for that is because you're going to essentially burden them with the task of becoming role models for another generation. I mean, one of the most important reasons why companies should have diversity initiatives is it helps the company itself, but it also helps generate this population of people who can become role models for future individuals who then can use that as a way to kind of see themselves in these different paths. Because if you don't have, it's very difficult to imagine yourself on a particular path, you don't take that first step, and like taking that first step is really hard. So you kind of have to bootstrap it by trying to identify those individuals that you think can contribute to this as early as possible and helping to develop them and helping putting them into this environment. Then you ask a lot of them, which is that now we're going to ask you to sort of come back to the community and be a role model for the community and help others understand this path that you can take. And then it takes a long time. But if you do this, you can start to repair a lot of the things that are really challenging about diversity initiatives, like pipeline challenges and things like that, where it's just hard to find the actual people that you might want to bring into these roles, regardless of talent levels. So I think that's kind of the best advice that I could give there. It's a really challenging problem, but I think that as long as you can think of it as like a long problem, something that you really need to think about in terms of a multi-generational community challenge, I think it's possible.
Great. Marcus?
Well, from the German perspective, it's not comparable, but when we look to Eastern Germany and to the coal regions, we had this huge discussion about the shift that is there going to happen. The coal industry is going down finally, and we had this coal commission in Germany, and they said, okay, what should we do? The younger people all leaving these regions, and they are going to the big cities, and so the talents are moving away. And so this is more a structural discussion. So what can we do to keep people there, to give them some hope, some perspectives there? And this is what I already mentioned before. It's we do this future hubs, for example, that we give money into the regions, that we build up structures, co-working spaces, and finance startups, for example. And Eastern Germany also has the problem there are no huge companies. There are all small and medium-sized companies, some of them very specialized. So I think it's a long process. It will take 10 to 15 years or even more longer to build up new structures in these regions. And I think it's important to bring people together, like-minded people, and they say, okay, let's do something new here. Let's start something in Brandenburg, for example. They started something called Kodorf. It's really outside the big cities, and the people say, okay, I'm willing to work here. There's a digital infrastructure, and I don't want to go to the big city. I can stay here in my hometown. This is a startup. It's financed for, let's say, 2 or 3 years, and I can work here. I don't have to move anywhere else. So from the governmental perspective, we have to build up new structures, and it will take a long breath to be successful here.
Great, great. So we'd like to widen the dialogue. I know folks have questions and some great ideas. So we have some time for questions, and we have some mics out here. So if you could maybe do what happened last time, is kind of line up behind the mics, that would be great.
Hi, my name is Antonia Klotz. I'm a journalist, and I would like to know if you look to other countries, what their models are.
For sure, we looked in other countries what their models are, but we also have experience from the past that we, as I mentioned, in Industry 4.0 that we will do for artificial intelligence. We also have a strong cooperation with France, for example, but I cannot tell you in detail what are best practices from other countries. We do, yes, for sure, but I cannot give you any example or detail for another, or for something similar of another country.
Yeah, okay. So,
in the US?
Yeah, in the US. So the company that I work for is a global company, and so we're constantly thinking about the ways that different countries think about their approach to this whole class of problems that we're talking about here. You know, our headquarters are here, but at this point, the majority of our company is outside the United States. And so, yeah, we're constantly looking to different models and trying to understand different things. I mean, you know, in the topic of labor, it's just a fascinating comparison. Right? The U.S. is so different in terms of the way labor is organized politically than it is outside the U.S. You know, labor is relatively weak here. It's almost all public sector. Whereas when you go to Europe, you know, you have co-determination, right? You actually have labor sitting on the board of directors of companies, which in the U.S. is like crazy, right? That's like so off the rails. And then that happens all over Europe. And then you go to other countries that have different notions of the sort of interaction and the social contract between citizen and government than what we have in the US. And so we have to interact with all those different models and think about how those different things are going to affect these questions. But I think that when we come back to kind of the first principles, we find that there's a fair amount of coherence in these ideas about what makes humans useful and interesting and what makes technological systems useful and interesting. And they're pretty consistent across countries. There's not a lot of variation there.
Great. Other questions?
I'm going to ask a question while I have the mic.
Okay.
So in Germany, we're very good at getting the young labor force into the labor force through the apprenticeship program. The public partnerships. They're very good at that. The problem I see is that with the very specific skills that people learn in these apprenticeships, unemployment later in life is more of an issue. So I think the lifelong learning initiatives you mentioned are going to be a lot more important as sort of the labor force transforms. Can you speak a little bit more as to the exact initiatives that are happening? And maybe likewise, Asher, for you, is there sort of do you see a narrowing, approaching in the US industry of taking up apprentice-like systems?
Interesting.
Well, the German national re-education strategy is just at the beginning. It started in 2019 together with the BMBF. And these two ministries will do this together, but it's still on the road. So it's not fixed in detail what the strategy is doing. But I can tell a little more from our perspective from the national artificial intelligence strategy, because the BMAS is responsible for work and also for societal aspects. Beside these hubs I already mentioned, we will also do something that we call a matching platform, so that you can match your skills also with future jobs, that you for yourself have an idea, okay, what are my skills, what will be needed in the future. So it's an idea, so something like self-assessment, for example, that you can see, okay, what kind of training do I need? And also the Bundesagentur für Arbeit maybe can offer some courses, or you can go to a private partner and to re-educate yourself, because we need to invent these tools in the next years, and the lifelong learning process is really at the very beginning. Also, the universities in Germany maybe have to change. They also have to make offers to the people for shared education, so for, let's say, 6 years, 6 months, or 12 months, that you can re-educate yourself. And there's also the idea that you have account and a kind of account with some kind of money that you can use on your own to re-educate. That's not fixed yet, but this is something that is in a discussion, that you need an account that rises up 1 year after another, and maybe after 2 or 3 years you have, let's say, 5,000 euros, and you decide, okay, next 12 months I will go to the university to re-educate myself. You can do this in part-time or in full-time. It depends on the company you are working in. But we all need to build up these structures, and we have to do it fast.
So I think that so vocational training, which would be the training that has the most common, is the one where you most commonly have the apprentice master model. I think that if anything in the US, those careers are kind of undersubscribed, and there's an overemphasis on getting a bachelor's degree as opposed to focusing on other things that might be more career-oriented. And I think that those, developing those skill sets would be highly valuable. Silicon Valley is not a place that tries to narrow people in terms of the things that they're asked to be good at. If anything, it tries to go overly broad. And so I think that that's not really a problem from Silicon Valley, but that's not really the crux of the question. It's much more about a whole different sort of set of people who I think the overemphasis on getting a bachelor's degree has actually undermined a bit the ability and the sort of the value that we associate with vocational careers, which I actually think are quite valuable and aren't really subject to narrowing. In fact, I think that there are careers that tend to be more secure against technological innovation than kind of the mid-office type careers. There was a question from Professor Berrien's talk asking about these kind of middle office kind of rote worker careers. Those things seem much more disruptive and much more easily disrupted than a plumber, for example.
James Bridgman again. I'm interested in the political buy-in for some of these ideas. Now here in California, we have cities that are very interested in retraining. The state is really interested in that. But we don't really have a national government that backs the retraining the way you do in Germany. So on the German side, my question is, do all the political parties agree with these sorts of ideas? You have a multiplicity of political parties, but and then from the US side, the irony in my view is this: we had a promise from our president that he would bring industry back to the United States. And to me, the irony is that this type of technology might have been useful in doing exactly that. We talked about this Alabama example of how you could set up factories with a combination of people and robots doing things. But how do you see politically these sorts of things being implemented?
Well, in Germany, all the parties agree that we need a re-education and retraining system, that we have to widen this field and that we have to spend money on this, but it differs from one party to another how to do this. So Social Democrats have a different point of view than Liberal Democrats, for example. But from my point of view, no matter what kind of government we will have, all the governments will support this re-education and re-skilling idea, because it's elemental for the German economy. We don't have raw materials and so on, all this high-tech experience, but most important are the heads, and we have to invent in our people or spend money into the people. And in Germany, we have the Digitalgipfel right now. It's the second day, and our state secretary, Mr. Böning, said we have to spend the same amount of money into people than we spend into technology. And I think this is the right focus. And all the other parties would agree on this.
At the national level, American politics are a shit show, so I don't think there's a lot that's going to get done there. I mean, in some ways, we're fortunate that local control is a feature of American governance because it gives a lot of opportunity for these types of experiments. It also means that vast swaths of the country get left out because there's not interest at the local level to do anything about it. And so I don't see any way that this is going to get fixed on at the national level anytime soon, but I think that there's a lot of promise in some of the things that are happening at the local level. So hopefully those things will serve as examples for what can happen at a larger scale.
All right, I'm Niklas. I'm also getting a PhD in material science right now.
Woohoo!
We've talked a lot about, or you've talked a lot about retraining, reskilling, and upskilling versus what degrees people have in the first place. So if you would have to decide, what would you say is better suited for the future? That we want to try to maintain this diverse skill set of people, like different trainings, and later kind of train them on the job to be suitable for this AI-focused market, or try to shape the initial training of people that we have a much higher percentage of people getting degrees in computer science and machine learning and so on?
So, I mean, almost all valuable training is on-the-job training. I think that one of the most valuable things about getting a PhD is that it teaches you that it's okay to work on something for a really long time without necessarily seeing results right away. Because a lot of important problems have that character. And so I think that's probably, I always joke that I don't do anything for my PhD, but I actually do, right? Because I'll take on projects that have multi-year timeframes, and that's hard to do unless you've done it once before. And so it's a good ground to do that. I think that, we hire a ton of computer scientists from all the, best universities and so on, and they come in and they don't actually know how to develop, right? They don't actually know how to code in a collaborative coding environment. And that's just something that you have to teach them, right? And every environment's a little bit different, and there's a lot of things that they have to learn. They understand a lot of important theory, and that theory actually ends up being useful, but it actually takes a while before those things start being really useful. They're not useful on day one. There's a whole lot of other things that they need to learn. And I think that applies across almost any technical careers, that most of the training actually is on-the-job training, sort of regardless of the background. Certainly in in the more technical fields. Vocational training, you should know how to do a lot of things on day one. It's another difference there.
Hey, Andreas from Austria. I have a short question. You guys were asked the question if you take a look at different regions, different countries, etc. And as I'm coming from kind of the little brother from Germany, I have a couple of different perspectives how things are done in Austria, especially from the region where I'm from Western Austria, so Vorarlberg, which is close to Liechtenstein and Switzerland. Beautiful region, by the way. So what I wanted to ask you is, in terms of decentralization, like politics in Germany, everything is decided on like a high level of politics, more or less, where maybe it's not, okay, then it's not. So what we see, what we have in our state, for example, is that the state politics really have an entrepreneurial driven focus, and that kind of the rules between each states get kind of adjusted to the businesses around it. You see the same in Switzerland, kind of, and also Liechtenstein, but that's kind of too small. So my question would be like, how you see if you can go deep dive kind of and give the states within, like you do in the US, also like more freedom and more power to decide?
Well, all the federal states in Germany, the Bundesländer, they also have initiatives on digital transformation. The federal state is motivating them to do something. They also give money to the Bundesländer, or they do half of the federal state, half of the Bundesländer. So if you want to deal with the digital transformation on a local level, you need the Bundesländer and also the structures, the Industrie- und Handelskammer and so on. So this you cannot do from Berlin alone. That's absolutely impossible. I remember Industry 4.0, maybe some of you know the platform Industrie 4.0. 3.0, this was working for 5 years now, and they had a lot of really good ideas. And after 2 or 3 years, they said, okay, but we are not coming to the single companies, to the company in the Schwarzwald, for example. The small and medium-sized enterprises are not coming to Berlin, for example, or they're not going to Stuttgart. And then they decided to build a transfer network and give money to the VDMA, for example, as a huge machinery association and so on. You cannot do it centralized from Berlin, so you need the support of the Bundesländer, for example. Otherwise, it won't work, from my opinion.
Hi, my name is Danny Lucas. I'm from Germany. I have a question for Mr. Sinensky. So we were talking about ethics training in civil engineering in comparison to computer science. And it's obvious in civil engineering, if the engineer makes a mistake, people get hurt physically, and the damage that happens through data science or computer science is a very different thing. So my question is, how would you implement the ethics training in computer science?
So we actually teach a course in one of the computer science lecture series at Stanford on this, and talk about some of these concepts. But you know, if there's a data breach at a big company and 100 million identities are lost, I would say that might be damage on par to a bridge falling down, right? It's a really big deal, and you have to think about the consequences of the possibility that those kinds of things can happen. Like, what happens when things go wrong? What protections are in place? You know, how are you thinking about the remediation of your choices? And there's a lot that you can talk about in the computer science domain about what are potential use cases for this? What are the protections that are in place? How are things being architected so as to avoid certain types of bad outcomes, limiting blast radius? This gets into system design, gets into the code itself. And then also, you know, even if code is being used as intended, is that a good intention, right? Is it being used on the right class of problems? Are these things that are, you know, good or bad for the world? I think it's important, even if you disagree, even if two people disagree about what is a good use for technology, there should at least be a conversation about it, right? If you're not having the conversation about it, then you never actually get to deal with it frontally, and you need to, because the world is a complicated place, and it's only getting more complicated. And so I don't think that computer scientists get to be off the hook for this anymore, especially with how ascendant they are generally in culture and how much sort of the world is looking to them to lead in a lot of ways. They need to be taking on these questions as part of their business.
Hi, I'm Anna Summers from Kiel also. We are talking about the future of work, and so I wanted to bring up shortly climate change. Do you think that some sort of social responsibility for firms should be implemented into law in the way we use work and how resources are gathered? So.
You want to take that one?
Well, from my personal point of view, yes, they should, but it's up to the companies. And we have this huge discussion in Germany about climate change and the responsibility of economics and the companies. And it should be a part of every company that they reflect themselves. So what is my impact on environment, on climate change, and so on. But it's up to the companies to decide this.
Yeah, I think that there's, well, so climate change is real, climate change is here, it's happening right now. Anyone who smells the smoke in the air knows that that's actually things that are happening as we speak. I think that basically we all actually have a duty to participate in this. I think that the topics that we're discussing, they have a lot of impact on climate change, but really climate change is extremely uneven in how it's sort of, how it exists in the world, right? There's like 10 companies that produce 50% of all the greenhouse gases in the United States, right? It's like a tiny fraction. And so the idea that, I'm going to do a good job of recycling this plastic bottle after this talk, I'm going to do that, but it doesn't really make a big difference as compared to thinking about what those companies should be doing and how they're thinking about things. So I do think that it matters. It gets back to some of the topics that came up again during Professor Berrien's talk about the difference between thinking about growth as like an essential feature of humanity versus sustainability, right? It's going to catch up to us eventually, right? And so one way or the other, we're going to have to deal with it, and it makes more sense to deal with it now. But I don't think that we have a mature understanding of how things like AI and machine learning, for example, are going to contribute a lot to those problems. And there's obviously a lot of people who are working on that, but it's not at the level of really shifting policy.
So I'm getting a subtle message that we have like 30 seconds left, but do you have a quick question?
Yeah, it's pretty quick, and it's actually linked to the one that was just asked, and I think in your last sentence you referred to it. So again, coming back to the aspect that right now much of this is focused on a growth-oriented society, but when we link it back, and if we change our scope towards meaning and towards sustainability, then the whole picture is very different. So I just wanted to have your thoughts. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, the things I was just saying, I think it's a fascinating idea. It's very hard for me to put myself in the mindset of thinking about, even in the context of sustainability, not also thinking about growth. Because it's just the world that I've grown up in is one that assumes it, and so it's difficult to step out of that. I think it's a really interesting idea. I need to think about it a lot more to be able to talk about it intelligently. I'd love to get your thoughts on it, actually, since it's something that you're clearly interested in, because it's a fascinating idea.
I think the whole economic system will change. We are talking about jobs right now. I think from my point of view, there will be less work in the future, what's not bad from my point of view, because people can more care about social aspects or about family, and I think we will reduce the work we do. And for me, this is an example how the whole economic system will change, and maybe we have to change our point of view that growth is not the way our economic system should work. And I think we will have this discussion in the next years, how the whole economic and work system will change. And from my point of view, maybe in 10 or 20 years, we have a completely different ecosystem. And I think also artificial intelligence, big data and AI can help to get a more efficient economic system and also a more sustainable ecosystem.
Well, thank you for your questions, and please thank our panelists.